We broke LinkedIn apparently, everyone. Goodness gracious, I don't know what happened there. We are going to bring this back up. Transition to our next session actually, because we finished right there, close to the end of Chuck's. He's had a few minutes left. We are going to kick this off. We're going to take it over to Pam Marmon. Let Pam talk to us a little about how less is more. I'm going to get her up, get her started, and then I'm going to actually come back in and chime in for everybody else that's trying to transition over to this live stream link, because you might have missed that. So hang tight. We're going to get Pam's up here, and then we will get this rolling. Hang tight. 1 second. All right.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here and share a message on less is more in regards to leading organizational transformation within your companies. My name is Pam Marmon, and I'm the founder of Marmon Consulting. We are a change management consulting firm. We help companies transform. And this is something that I'm so passionate about that I recently authored a book called No One's Listening and It's Your Fault. And I will talk about the model of how do you get your message and communicate within an organization so that you are effective. So let's get started. Less is more, how to get your message heard during organizational transformations. The main idea that I want to talk to us about today is that leaders who effectively listen to whatever their people are saying can communicate organizational change in a way that will resonate with the people and ultimately transform their organization. So the key here is our ability to listen. And I'll talk about the different ways that we can do that throughout the duration of a large transformation. But first, let's address why we fear change. The reason why I wrote the book, No One's Listening and It's Your Fault, is because I realized that through conversations with leaders, there was a level of frustration and a level of fear that creeped in within their organization. Frustration that people weren't doing what they were asked to do, and the fear of failure. If things didn't work out, what would that mean for their role, for their company, for their people, for their teams? But I want to address the real reason why we fear change. And a lot of times that is because of the unspoken rules around organizational structure and status quo and power and control, or it could be around financial fears that we may have. If things don't work out, what could my future look like? Or if I have knowledge of some system or technology or processes, and if we shift that power situation, what would my role be in the organization? So there are various different levels why we fear change and why people feel uncomfortable with change. But I wanted to address the preliminary foundational mindset that we as leaders owe to ourselves and to our organization. And here it is. With the proper process, change is not hard. So how many of you are absolutely shocked that I said that change is not hard, right? Because we've been taught to believe that change is hard, that it's inevitable and we have to learn and figure out how to adapt to it, but we are going to resist it. What I want to challenge us today is to think that if we were to shift the equation and if we were to look at how to make change less hard, not hard, through the proper process, imagine the outcomes that we will get. First, from a mindset perspective for you as a leader, entering a change with a positive outlook versus a negative outlook. And then secondly, for your organization, planting seeds of excitement and enthusiasm and the potential of what this change could be versus potential resistance and fear. And so this is the primary area that I want to address in terms of our mindsets. With the proper process, change is not hard. And we as leaders owe that to ourselves and to our organizations as we enter large organizational transformations. How to get your message heard has to do with barriers to your message. So as we think about the different reasons why it's difficult currently to get your message heard, I'm going to highlight three. The first one is it's not the right message. And what do I mean by that? It's not the right message. Sometimes we send messages into our organizations, but we're not mindful of contextually what's happening within the organization. What are other projects? What are other initiatives? What are other priorities that are important in that organization? And sometimes we're just not sending the right message. It's not landing well with people because it's not cohesive. We haven't thought about the end receiver and what their experience will be like. And so we haven't quite addressed that portion of putting together the content, the messaging, and the timing of all of that as it comes together into the organization. The second one is not the right time. And time is interesting because we can split it into organizational time and then the timing of day even. But the right time is really important as we look at the organizational landscape. What else is happening in the organization? Are you competing for different priorities? And most of us are, because a lot of organizations have ambitious leaders who aspire greatly to achieve much. And so aligning the right timing of when your message happens from an organizational perspective, as well as the right time of day. I oftentimes tell my leaders, do not send an important message on a Friday afternoon. People will not read it. It will get buried, especially if there's a long weekend. You just won't get the benefit of it. And so the right timing within even the week is so critical when we send out messages. And the third, you're not the right sender. And that one can feel very personal, but it's not always very personal. So what we've learned through the research done by ProSci, which is an organization that does change management research and training, the research says that if an organization is going through a large transformation, people want to hear from their leader, from the executive leader, about this change, this visionary change. But when it comes to the day-to-day tasks, people want to hear from their manager. That's who they expect to hear it from. That's who takes care of their performance. And so it's very important that when we think of the message and sending it out, who is the right sender, as well as who's the right receiver for that message. So these are 3 reasons why there are barriers to our messages getting heard within an organization. And it's important for us to think about these barriers as we look at how do we stage the communication efforts across an organization. Let's talk about the LESS model: listen, empower, speak, and solve. This is a model that I use with organizations as I craft their change management strategy and the activities associated within each of these parameters when we look at organizational change. Oftentimes, large transformations can take 6 months, a year, maybe even 2 years. And so pacing ourselves and pacing the change management activities will really help us to engage people, to manage resistance, to engage them in a way that's going to be meaningful for the individual as well as the team and as well as the organization. So we're going to dive right into each one of these areas. The first one is listen. The most important thing to remember as we're starting out, going back to our main topic, which is the importance of listening, is that within an organization, there needs to be alignment. And that alignment has to happen at the vision level. So as organizations are setting out their strategic plans and identifying the areas that are important to work on, unless there's alignment and unless the effort that you're leading falls under this umbrella of the overall change and strategy of the organization, people will feel like it's disjointed and they won't respond to it the right way. So the first thing you want to do is make sure that it's aligned well in your organization, that matches the vision, that you can speak to it, you can represent it. The second thing to consider is change saturation. And now how many of us can relate to this one? Change saturation is it's a culprit that many of us have suffered the effects of because we have ambitious leaders who want to do a lot of good work. And what happens is each department is launching something new and it layers on top of one another to the point where people who are experiencing that change shut down. They can't receive anything else. They can't hear one more message. They don't want to take one more action. We resolve change saturation by working across the different departments and aligning on those changes, identifying who are the impacted stakeholders, what does the change look like for them, what's the right timing, and then how do we mitigate it where you do have overlap, which happens often within different stakeholder groups. How do we make sure that the messages that we share with them are maybe co-branded, or we're thoughtful of how we deliver them so that it doesn't feel like this is one project sending a message and then another project sending a message, and they can't quite connect the dots within their organization. And the third important part of listening is conducting a readiness assessment. Now, I must admit, this is one of my favorite activities because essentially it's an activity where we interview different stakeholders within an organization to ask them questions around, what is this change? What is the culture in your organization? What can we expect from a communication perspective from your team? What's the best way to communicate? How do we train them well? How do we equip them? Where could resistance be? What does it look like if there is resistance? And as we craft our change strategy, we're really relying on the data that we collect at this point from this readiness assessment to identify specific activities and part of our toolkit from a change perspective on what will resonate here, what will make this message stick. The readiness assessment will also give us the lens that we need as we look at the tone of the messages, or just how engaged people need to be in that process. For some organization, and this is all based on each individual culture, for some organizations, people want to be involved right from the start, and they have a very democratic maybe method of running the organization from a culture perspective, and other organizations just want to be told, tell me what to do, and I'm fine with that. And so this is where we flush that out, and we are listening to the people. We truly are making ourselves available to hear those messages so that we can craft a change strategy that's going to resonate with people. The second is empower. Empower is all about learning how to engage others and to share that content and that message through the lens of others. So I'm going to start with the first one, which is share the podium. And what that means is that as we are looking at our organization and the changes that are impacting the organizations, we need to be able to allow our executive leaders to share the message, our managers to share the message, and our change champions to share the message. Let me go into each one. So from an executive leader perspective, what we need to do with executive leaders is bring awareness to the table so they know that this is happening. And oftentimes this is where it's interesting with multiple departments, where you have to have those conversations, and the leaders truly need to understand what's happening within their business area, but also other people's business areas. So we share the podium. We engage the managers, and the managers oftentimes get overlooked. I actually call the managers my MVPs, because they have the most power when it comes to the direct access to the employee. And so with managers, what I typically do with organizations, and I'm going to give an example shortly, is provide talking points for them so that they can articulate the change, they feel empowered, they're there for their employees. The example I want to give is with a job architecture project that I led with a large healthcare client that had multiple sites. And what we did was we were launching this job architecture. We were anticipating that up to 80% of people's job titles were going to change. So for some people, this is a big deal. Your title, who you are, you've worked for it, and you want to be recognized for it. And we identified a group of people that could perceive this change as negative. And so when we rolled it out to the organization, we started at the top with the executive leader. And so the CEO presented on it and gave a little video that he did, and we walked him through that process. And then we cascaded that to the managers, and we held manager town halls, and we equip them and prepare them for the conversations with their employees. And we also allow the HRBPs to join those conversations as needed in case the manager anticipated some negative reaction from the employee. And all of that was executed very well because we empowered the managers. We didn't leave them at the end. We didn't exclude them. We wanted them to feel like they had a say. They were engaged from the beginning. And ultimately, we shared the podium with them. And then the change champions, which a lot of organizations are currently using change champions, which is fantastic. The change champions are influencers within an organization. They are the people who you can tap on to share information, but also receive feedback. So as we roll a large initiative, typically about halfway through, we roll out the change champion group, and we set a cadence and set the expectations, the roles and responsibilities, and we provide them with periodic progress of the work. And we also ask them to cascade that or share that content within their teams so that next time they return back, we can get more information from them and adjust. If there's a shift in our communications that we need to do or potential resistance, we can address it early on, so we don't wait until we go live with a project to encounter a lot of that feedback. Secondly is the case for change. The case for change is document that we put together, and it addresses the what's in it for me, why we're doing this project, what's the vision for it. It's the foundational content that we create at the beginning of a project so that we can build all additional communications from that. And so what we're looking there is for consistency in messaging, in the delivery of it. The case for change is something that we share with the executive leaders and with the managers and the change champions, again, for that consistency of delivering the message. And then turning on the microphone is truly about unleashing people into their organizations and allowing them to, with the guidance of the project team, to share that message across the organization. And as I mentioned, the managers are our MVPs. And so being able to intuitively listen to the feedback that we're receiving and engaging people early on is critical in this stage of the project. Next, we move on to speak. So this is the really fun part about creating that communication strategy. I'm going to use this visual map. For those of you who have been to London, this probably looks very familiar. But oftentimes when we think of communications, we have to step back and say, at the organizational level, where are the channels of communication that are happening internally to the organization? What are those channels like? Where can we tap in so that we're not creating additional channels? And obviously, if you need to do so because they don't exist, I think that's very appropriate. But this is where we're really looking to see what can we tap into that already is in place that makes sense for the content that we're delivering and for the audience that we're delivering. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the process of creating this communication strategy. The first one is to identify the channels. And so once you do that, we move to step 2, which is identify the channels that are relevant to you, because you are not going to use every single communication channel possible. You're going to pick the ones that are most relevant, that are going to have the greatest return on investment for your project. The third one is to prioritize those communication channels. Again, we work with limited resources and limited time. And so we want to make sure that we're prioritizing the most impactful ones, the frequency that we connect with people through those channels, the type of information we share, or the dialogue that we would have through those channels. The next one, step number 4, is to identify the message frequency, as I mentioned earlier. And it's about being able to tap in those communication channels frequently enough so that you get the right content without overwhelming people with too much. And there is a fine balance and an art to it. And number 5 would be considered the sender of the message. So step 5 is we think about the channel, the frequency, who is the appropriate sender. That's important for us to document as well. Step 6, and which is the final step, is to establish the communication strategy that is most appropriate based on the timing and the intended audience of that information. So these are a few quick steps that you can implement as you think of your communication strategy. And I have more information available on my website if you're interested in taking a look at that. The second step here is to cascade those messages. So once you have the strategy in place and you've drafted your case for change, and you've identified the messages that you need to send out, structuring them in a way that's going to resonate with people is really important. One thing that I avoid at all costs is surprising leaders with information that they didn't know by sending it at the same time to their employees. And so we always want to include our leaders early on in the project to make sure that they're aware. One of the projects I've worked on, we're implementing a large technology system, and what we needed to do was to make sure that our leaders had bought into the technology, but also the process changes within HR that we were shifting. So we were shifting the way we were asking employees to engage with us, and we were shifting the way we were asking HR to work together between all the various HR functions. And so it was very important for us to cascade that message from the top, from the leadership team, down to each individual leader within each group, and then down to the actual employee that was gonna, we were changing their world essentially, and how we were opening up opportunities for them to be more strategic by streamlining their processes and applying new technology. All of that was successfully executed because of our ability to cascade those changes and those messages throughout their teams. And number 3 is tailoring those messages. As we start those conversations, I truly believe that the more prescribed our presentations are, the less effective our conversations are. It's incredibly important that we talk to people, because we can't lead change by sending an email. That is the most ineffective way to lead change. So the conversations are really important. And this is where we start to tailor our messages as we go into each individual group. What's changing for them? What's in it for them, and why would they care? They may not need to know the whole scope of the change itself, but they certainly will want to know, how will my day-to-day job change? How will my interactions with my team and the employees that I support change? What would that look like? And so being able to tailor those messages is incredibly important. And the last part is solve. I absolutely love the solve part. It's all about metrics, but I'm going to start by talking about incentives. I love incentives because incentives drive behavior. And I recall an HR project that I was working on where we were implementing technology, and I asked the project manager to connect me with their incentive director. And the project manager said, "But why? We're talking about technology." And I said, "Yes, but we're talking about incentives. We're talking about people, and we're asking people to do something different with technology. And unless we understand and we align on the incentives, we're not going to get our desired outcome." And so that was a very interesting conversation as we looked. Essentially, what we're looking for is, are there barriers to the desired behavior in our incentive model, in our incentive plan? And that's important to address if there are barriers so that you can get the results that you want. The second point is what to measure. What to measure is all about creating the change management dashboard and understanding the effectiveness of your work. Typically, I will categorize within that what to measure bracket culture, aspects of the culture that we want to address, the communication pieces, the training pieces, leadership. Leadership is incredibly important in driving change. Are the leaders demonstrating that change? Are they being vocal and supportive of the change? Or are they being silent or negative, worse? And so once you identify the categories that you want to measure, then as we look into how do we measure, typically we do surveys, and HR is very comfortable and familiar with the surveys, but typically we look at different surveys, and I will look at different stakeholder groups. What is the right survey approach, or how do I gather data? How do I gather that content? Sometimes it's through interviews, oftentimes it's through surveys, and then oftentimes the systems that we implement will actually give us data as well in terms of satisfaction scores or users or whatever it may be. And so once we pull all of that together, we can assess the effectiveness, and we can really address, are we solving the issue that we set out to solve? All of the change initiatives we lead have to align with the project management goals and objectives. Change management can sometimes feel fluffy to people, but truly it is about the results. And we're looking at the people and how will people perceive the change, and how will they be impacted by the change? What will it mean for them? Because as a leader, even today said to me, it's so easy to roll out technology. The hard part is the people part, right? And so if we engage people early on in the process, we're so much more likely to get the results that we want. We're so much more likely to hear when there is resistance early on in the process, so we can resolve it and we can move forward. And I'm going to finish off with a little free gift that I have for everybody on our conference call. This is a change communication strategy that's available on my website, marmonconsulting.com. And you can come in here and take a look at the different less model, basically, and some of the questions just to prompt you as you think through staging the change, staging the communications, and understanding really how do we engage people early on? How do we allow ourselves to be good leaders and good listeners in the process? And what does it truly mean to listen, from an activity perspective, but also from a mindset perspective, as we hear the voices of our customers, our employees, the people that are impacted by the change. And with that, I'm going to close out. Feel free to chime into the comments. I'm happy to address any questions that you have. And this presentation will be available to you. If you'd like to connect with me, you can do so through LinkedIn, or you can reach me at marmonconsulting.com. I would love to hear about change efforts that you're leading within HR, and share any insights that I've gathered over the years on the HR initiatives that I've helped HR leaders with. Thank you so much, and I look forward to our conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Pam, for bringing us back from technical difficulties. Apparently, we broke LinkedIn. They had a limit on how many people we could get into the conversation, and we were being a little too rowdy over here in our HR corner of the world. So I'll consider that, along with all of you, a badge of honor. Thank you. Thank you for that. So we have one last conversation today, one last fireside chat with Amit Parmar. He is the VP of Global HR at Unisys. And I'll talk more about how I met him. I want to ask him some questions. We'll chat a little about it. But one of the things we're going to talk about is kind of the future of work, what's happening now, and whether this might make the workplace more accessible for individuals. I'm kind of curious to hear his insights there, and it'll be a fun part of the conversation. We'll wrap up the day with this, then I'll have some closing announcements, things like that. So let's go ahead and jump into the conversation with Amit and get that going. Thanks. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to HR Summer School. I'm Ben Eubanks, hosting you this week, and so glad to have you here. One of our fireside chat conversations, this one actually, is going to be with Amit Parmar. He is a global HR executive, super sharp, and it's funny because someone said, hey, will you please tell us like how you're meeting all these people? How do you know them? And so he's, of all the faculty for this event, the one I've known the shortest amount of time, but the one who I've probably spent the most amount of time with virtually, it feels like, in the last few weeks. So Amit, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ben, and you're far too kind for all your kind words. Awesome to get to know you, Ben.
I have really enjoyed it for sure, and obviously tapping on the shoulder to hear some of your insights. I talked to a lot of leaders, but when I had a chance to connect with you at one of the last actual live conferences, which seems like 100 years ago, before everything started shutting down, I got to hear some of your insights and I got to hear some of your perspective on the world, and I really appreciate it. So I wanted to bring some of that forward thinking perspective to the session today. So before we jump in and I ask you a couple questions,
Sure.
tell the audience a little about yourself, who you are.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. So as Ben indicated, Amit Parmar. I'm the Global Vice President of HR for Unisys Corporation. We're based in Bluebell, about give or take 18,000 associates, about $3 billion in revenue. I've been with Unisys for almost 15 years now. Great company, just love the culture. Have had maybe 9 or 10 different careers within Unisys, and that's what keeps me here. Based near Bluebell, so that's right outside of Philadelphia. So that's just a little bit about me. And I have a 9-year-old son who, right now in the COVID age, just trying to figure out how to keep him occupied.
Absolutely. We were swapping some stories a little bit ago before we got on live, and like dad to dad, like let's keep the train rolling. So keep things moving in the right direction, and most importantly, keep mom sane. That is
absolutely.
That is our phrase of the week. So let's talk for a little bit. Let's talk about the world of work kind of going forward, because I don't know about you, but my inbox is full of people saying, well, here's what's happening, right here in this exact second. And it's overwhelming because every time like the smallest bit of information comes out, like everybody jumps on it and everyone's sharing. But I'd like to take a little bit of a further perspective out, if you don't mind. And I'd love to hear from you, because I think you have some good thinking here. What does the future of work look like? How is that going to change? The relationships, the way we see work, the way we perceive how work gets done. Talk a little about your thinking there.
Yeah, absolutely, Ben. So, spot on. I mean, there's just so much information out there. It's kind of hard to keep up, and from, what's a fact versus fiction, all of that, right? But at the end of the day, right, it just boils down to really the relationships that you have with your people, right? And, not just currently pre-COVID, during COVID. And then the question now that a lot of the companies and leaders are thinking through is post-COVID, right? And literally that's a debate in internal as well as external discussions that I'm following as well as having. And from my perspective, I do think as we think about literally over the next 2 to 3 months, right, what does the world of work look like? And then the way I think about this is you've got work that we have proven now over the last 2 to 3 months that can actually be done in a high performing and a high productivity way remotely, right? Now, of course, there are jobs, there's work that absolutely requires you to be there in person. So, I don't think there's any, curtailing that. I think it's just really thinking about what work, what jobs we believe we can actually, measure effectively from a performance standpoint, and frankly, trust our people just to do, right? Regardless of where they are physically, right? As long as they have internet connectivity. And, sorry, go ahead, Ben.
So you said that trust
You're getting
word.
ready for a question.
I'd love to hear what you mean more. Like, has trust played a bigger part in this? Are we having to trust people more, do you think?
Yeah, I do believe, now that there's some data available, right? So over the last, 2 or 3 months, right? we now have data that actually shows that, hey, this work actually can be done in an effective way, remotely, right? And there is now kind of hard data and productivity. Actually, productivity has gone up, and that's what I keep reading about, as well as, we're still doing internal analysis on it. But in general, I would say now there are proof points that we can actually, as leaders, right, as HR leaders, as well as business leaders, we can actually go back and say, you know what, let's look at these jobs, right? Why did you need them in the office in the first place? Now, I'm not saying that that's the right answer. People have different, you talk to 10 people, they'll have different views around what they feel comfortable with, right? Some people like going into the office, which is perfectly fine, right? But others may not. So I don't know if there is a silver bullet answer to this, but what I do know is it has opened the doors for us to really start thinking about what I call more flexibility, right?
Hmm.
And
What,
sorry, go
sorry.
ahead.
I was going to ask you kind of a follow up to that, because I think, let's take the bait. Let's say that all the early findings are true, that people can be more productive, that we can get things done. I know for me, when I transitioned several years ago to not having to drive to work every day, I know that my mental state dramatically improved, and it was nice to not spend all the money on gas and all the other fun stuff that's associated with the commute, right, and stress and everything else. But one of the other things that it seems like it opens up is the opportunity to be more inclusive in our hiring practices for those people that might have a hard time getting to an office, whether they're in a big city and don't have the funds to do that. It's cost prohibitive, or if they're in a place like Alabama where I am, where everybody has a car, but some people have a hard time getting to an office. So I'm kind of curious, do you think that's going to affect that in some way?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's such a positive development, right? In the grand scheme of things, obviously, it's nobody wants to be in the COVID situation that we're in, but you got to take the silver lining. You got to make lemonade out of lemons, right? So, I do believe, the post-COVID world, I do believe it will open up opportunities for us to be more inclusive, where we could actually be at underserved communities more than we are today, right? We could actually tell candidates, right, like, hey, you know what, you don't need to take 4 buses to come to this office because you don't have a car, right? uh, so there is definitely a quality of life question as well, that I believe will get improved, post COVID, just depending on how leaders make decisions, right, around work. But I do believe, and then the less able people, right? So look at that population as well, and imagine you can open it up and say, you know what, why not work from home, right? And you don't need to spend 3 hours commuting on public transit, right? I mean, that's just a positive thing, I believe.
It excites me to think about someone who's kind of given up on the idea of being able to get to work because they don't have a way to do that. There's not an infrastructure for that. And I mean, I know my background in HR for a lot of the companies I work for were small and mid-sized businesses, and like they don't have the funds, the budgets to make their workplace accessible. And so there have been phenomenal people that we wanted to hire in the past that like, we couldn't figure out a way to make that work. And so
Yeah.
we can't make an accommodation, but there's an attorney I'm actually interviewing for HR summer school, and we talked about, will this whole thing where companies said we can never let you work from home, suddenly everybody's working from home, like we snapped our fingers and there it is. Will that change the definition of reasonable accommodation and allow these people access to work that before employers said, well, we can't allow that, that's against our policy? Suddenly it's within the realm of reason, and so it
Absolutely.
opens up those opportunities.
Absolutely. Spot on, Ben, right? And, I do believe, actually, to your point, right, where you have startups, you have, small businesses who maybe can't even afford the real estate rent, right? You start to think about the opportunity for you to maybe actually reduce the OpEx that you have with your real estate, right? That's another positive outcome. It's all about how you really start to think about work, how you start to think about trust, right? With your associate base, right? And I know as HR colleagues who are, I'm sure the audience here, uh, we always talk about trust, right? And it's all about really making sure that our actions and our policies or procedures, I hate the word policy, but really that's what it is, right? Really align with the belief system that you want to drive, right? And I believe at the core of it, it's really how you trust your people to do the right thing, right?
You come back to that trust word again. Right?
Yeah.
That goes both ways, and I'm hoping that we look back on everything that's happened this year, and the employees that are working for companies that, hey, they treated us right. They did everything they could to support us. Not every company is going to, survive this unscathed, but for those that treated their people right, that's what they're going to remember long term. And that's where you build that really, really strong trust. And that so like those people that are just willing to do anything for you from an employee perspective, like I will go to bat for you. I will put it all on the line. I will give it my all, because when it came down to a tough situation, the employer did that for me as an employee. I'm sure a lot of companies or a lot of people are thinking about that right now. And that's been kind of interesting to watch from our perspective as HR leaders. Like, this is suddenly every conversation that's happening at an executive level. They're like, hey, make sure HR's in here because we want to hear make sure our talent leaders are in here because we need to hear how this is going to affect our people. What do we need to do next? How do we make sure that we're providing the right space, right? And so it's been, again, another silver lining is it feels like this has allowed us to be more strategic as HR leaders. And there's less of that, no, please invite me to the meeting. And now it's suddenly, you're here. Let's hope you're ready to perform.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's you're spot on there, Ben, right? It's about, okay, HR all of a sudden, and I'm fortunate enough to say, the HR function at Unisys has always kind of been there at the seat, right? And I'm sure like other companies as well, but it has definitely put a lot more emphasis on the people, the people relationship aspect of the business, right? Which is, to your point, and I don't know where I read this, or maybe it's my saying, I can't recall anymore, right? But really, it's, people are okay when times are good, right? But people remember you most on how they're treated when times are rough, right? And that is, I haven't seen any studies that prove that, but that's just a philosophy that we have, right? Which is, hey, you got to take care of your people, good times and in bad, right? And we believe the companies, and we've been, Unisys has been around 140 plus years, right? There's a reason for that, right? And the reason, I believe, is just how we care for our people.
Awesome. I want someone to go in the comments right now and make a little card, make one of those, like Michael J. Fox said, this kind of cards for Amit right there that says, people remember what their companies do to them during, how they treat them during the tough times. So let's get that out there official. Let's post it out there and make sure that is a real saying that can be attributed to you from now on, regardless of who said it originally. It does not matter. The sentiment is critically important. Gosh, this has been fun. So if someone wants to connect with you, wants to learn more about just the work you're doing, I know you do some writing and things online. So I'd love for you to share with people how they can follow you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Ben. So you can follow me on Twitter at HR for Life, because that is really my life, is HR, aside from my family. And you could also follow me on LinkedIn as well. Just look me up, Amit Parmar, Unisys, and email, right? I mean, I'm pretty reachable. Around the world, WhatsApp is like the place to be from a texting perspective. And so you should be able to find my number on LinkedIn as well to reach out.
Awesome. Good deal. Thank you so much for joining me for the conversation. This has been a lot of fun, and I've enjoyed it, and I hope everybody else did as well.
Well, thank you, Ben. Appreciate it.
Yes, sir. All right. To everybody else, thank you for joining us. Stay tuned for more HR Summer School coming right up.
Take care.
Okay. Goodness. Are you winded? A little bit exhausted? Feels like I've been sitting in this chair for days. Goodness gracious. So much good stuff today. Amit, thank you again for joining us for that last fireside chat, sharing some ideas about accessibility, about remote work, about how that can help, but about how we need to how we need to build trust in the organization. It was really fun for me to see how we did not put the speakers together to talk to each other, but the ideas and things they shared throughout the day, there were some interesting common themes that tied those things together. And that was that was incredible for me to see, and probably for you that are watching as well. So day one in the books. Wow, this is incredible. So a couple of quick comments, housekeeping things we got to take care of. Just a reminder, thank you again to our sponsors. Make sure you tag them, you thank them for making this possible to support the HR community. I'm so excited. 3 things we're looking for today. Number 1, hoping to get some good content. I think we got that one. I'm going to take the 6,000 comments we got on the LinkedIn live stream for the first part of it before we broke LinkedIn. 6,000 plus comments. I'm going to take that as a yes. We got that one. Number 2, the networking piece, connecting with each other. Again, lots of comments, lots of interaction. Over 5,000 people have already viewed it, and the day's not over yet. I think we've hit that one. And number 3 is inspiration. And I don't know about you, but I am personally inspired by what each of these speakers is sharing, bringing their perspectives, bringing their ideas to the table. Day 1's in the books, but guess what? Tomorrow's a new day. So many great things to come. So a couple of things really quick. Watch for an email coming this afternoon. And if you have not registered for the event, if you have not gone and registered for the event at hrsummerschool.org, that's down there at the bottom of the event all week long. It'll be a reminder there, but go and register there because we'll be sending out emails every morning to remind you what's coming, when to log on, midday to remind you about the trivia, those kind of fun things. I'll have the correct link going forward. And then last but not least, the things at the end of the day, kind of a recap and a prep for what's next on the next day. So you'll get an email later today if you're registered telling you what you can expect tomorrow, including things like a fireside chat with the CEO of the most prestigious HR certification organization in the world. We're also going to fire it up again right from the beginning, something to really inspire your spirit. A session called Bring Your Soul to Work with George Rogers. I'm so excited to have him share. He speaks to my heart, and I hope he's going to speak to yours tomorrow as well. And we'll wrap the day tomorrow with an episode of a live video episode of the Crazy and the King podcast, which is focused on D&I and how to create more inclusive workplaces. So tomorrow we have lots of great things coming up, and I don't know about you, but I'm thrilled to see it all. Thank you so much for joining me. I'll catch you in the morning, or tomorrow, I guess. We'll catch you tomorrow. We'll have some good stuff. And I know it's going to be so much fun. Thank you for joining me on day 1.